You know, when we picture birds of prey, we usually think wide open spaces,
Right.
like soaring eagles, falcons diving from the clouds.
Yeah, exactly. The classic image.
But today's deep dive is even more interesting.
Hmm.
You guys requested birds of prey, but in the city, the concrete jungle.
It really does make you think twice about what these birds need, to survive. We have this idea of them needing these huge wildernesses,
Right.
but some are actually really good at making the most of a totally different environment.
Like adapting to the city.
Exactly, yeah, cities.
So we're going to be learning all about this from an article, all about these urban raptors.
Catchy.
Yeah. And
Awesome.
honestly, it already has me looking at cities differently. It's like I've been walking past this hidden world with like hunting grounds between skyscrapers.
It's true. And it shows how adaptable nature is.
Absolutely.
Urban raptors are basically birds of prey that have adapted to not only just survive,
Right.
but actually do really well in cities.
Okay, so let's meet some of these city slickers, I guess we could call them. I'm imagining like pigeons scattering in the street as a shadow falls over them.
Yeah.
What kind of raptors are we talking about?
Well, I mean, one of the most, I guess, well-known examples is the peregrine falcon.
Okay.
These birds are so fast,
Oh, yeah.
like seriously fast. When they dive, it's incredible. We're talking over 200 miles an hour.
Wow.
And in cities, they've learned to use that speed to their advantage, making those tall skyscrapers into their own personal hunting grounds.
Now that you mention it, I have seen falcons circling above tall buildings. I always thought they were just passing through. But you're saying they actually use those buildings for more than just a scenic flight.
Yeah, totally. Those skyscrapers are like the cliffs they would naturally nest on. It gives them a great view to spot prey, which in the city often means pigeons.
So these birds that evolved to hunt in like more, I don't know, rustic environments are totally fine among all the steel and glass.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not even just falcons. Red-tailed hawks, for instance, are totally comfortable in those little green spaces you find in cities.
Parks and stuff.
Parks, cemeteries, even big yards sometimes. They might not be as crazy fast as falcons, but they've changed up their hunting to target squirrels and rats.
That makes sense. There are a lot of them in cities.
Right, so they've also made urban areas their home.
Okay, this is honestly blowing my mind. We're talking about all different types of these birds, each with their own little hunting methods shaped by the city. It's a whole different side to city wildlife that I never even thought about.
And we can't forget about the owls.
Oh, right, owls.
We don't see them as much because they come out at night.
Right, right.
But the article talks about how barn owls, especially, have found cities to be pretty good for hunting.
Really? Why is that?
Well, there's a ton of rodents in cities,
Sure.
and they like to take advantage of the darkness to catch them.
So we've got falcons in the sky, hawks in the parks, and then owls keeping the rodents in check. It's like an ecosystem we just don't see.
Yeah, exactly.
But what about the smaller birds of prey? Are they able to find a place in such a busy environment?
Yeah, actually. The American kestrel, for example.
Okay.
It's a smaller falcon that's actually pretty common in cities. They've adapted to use things like telephone poles, antennas, even building ledges as lookout points.
Interesting.
They mostly hunt insects and small birds, but it just shows how they can find their place, even with all the craziness of a city.
It's wild to think about these birds making their homes in a place like that, you know? But I gotta admit, something still got me wondering. We talked about how they hunt in the city, but what about the actual food? Like, is city food as good as what they'd find in the wild?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a big part of what makes these city birds so interesting. The city's food chain is definitely different than a forest or something.
Yeah.
But for raptors, it looks like cities are pretty good for a meal.
So pigeons and rats are a good replacement for what they'd normally eat.
Yeah. The article actually talks about how much prey there is, and it's not just pigeons and rats. Sparrows, starlings, mice, even the odd squirrel that gets too close to a park bench. It all adds up to a pretty reliable food source for these birds.
I guess it makes sense we see those animals as pests,
Right.
but to a hawk, they're dinner.
Exactly. And since cities don't have as many predators, those prey animals do really well, which means good things for the raptors, too. It's kind of cool how different species can balance each other out like that, even in a city.
Yeah, totally. But there's got to be some downsides to finding food in the concrete jungle, right? Can't all be easy meals.
You're right, hunting in the city has its own challenges. All the noise and stuff makes it hard for these birds to use their senses the way they normally would.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
They've evolved to be super sensitive to their surroundings. but cities throw a lot of distractions at them.
Yeah, I get it. Trying to hear a mouse in a park with people and cars everywhere must be impossible.
Exactly. And it's not just the sounds. The actual city itself is an obstacle course they wouldn't have in the wild.
Right.
Buildings, cars, power lines. It's a lot to navigate, and it takes real skill to hunt around all that.
So it's like, instead of just flying over a forest, they're doing aerial tricks to catch their meal.
Pretty much. They've gotten so good at weaving through tight spaces, avoiding stuff, and even planning their hunts around when there isn't much traffic. It's pretty amazing.
That's nuts. So we've got these birds thriving on food we don't even think about and working really hard to get it.
Yeah,
It really shows how adaptable they are.
for sure. And it makes you think, if they have the food situation figured out, what about the other big thing for survival? A safe place to live and raise their young.
Right, because you can't exactly build a nest on a traffic light.
Right.
Or can you? What's the article say about how they're nesting in the city?
Got me there. Traffic lights are probably out.
Yeah.
But they've actually found some really creative ways to nest in the most random spots. Turns out those skyscrapers that are perfect for hunting also make pretty good cliffs.
Wait, they're building nests on skyscrapers?
Yeah.
Like way up high.
Yeah. The article specifically mentions peregrine falcons loving those artificial cliffs. They like ledges on tall buildings, bridges, even industrial stuff, anywhere high up away from the city noise.
That is incredible. Makes you think differently about a penthouse view, huh?
Right. And get this, in some cities, people are realizing what the birds are doing and are making the city more inviting for them.
Hold on. So people are helping birds of prey live in the city. Tell me more about that. It's kind of heartwarming, Like, we think of the city as this totally separate thing from nature, but these birds are finding ways to make it work.
It's a good reminder that we can share these spaces.
Totally. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what were some of the big things you're taking away from all this?
Honestly, the adaptability of these birds just blows me away. We think of them needing these vast, wild areas.
Right, exactly.
But they're thriving in the city, one of the most unnatural environments out there.
Makes you realize how much we don't see, It's easy to just focus on the human side of things and forget about all the other creatures sharing our space.
It's true. And it makes you think, what other animals are adapting in ways we haven't even noticed?
That's a good point. So to everyone listening, next time you're walking down the street, maybe look up once in a while. You might spot one of these incredible birds and see the city in a whole new way.
Yeah, keep your eyes peeled. Nature's full of surprises, even in the concrete jungle.
Couldn't agree more. That wraps up our deep dive on urban raptors. We'll catch you guys next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world around us.